Good morning, welcome. I'm actually honoured to be here at PHP UK, and somewhat uniquely for a PHP conference, I'm giving a talk about PHP. That's pretty unusual. I have quite a bit of code in this talk, so I have a slide link here. It's also linked from Joined In, and my Twitter account has just tweeted it. So if you do want a copy of the code in front of you so that I'm not jumping slides too quickly, then please help yourselves. Let's talk about where we are in PHP, the past, the present, and the future. I've got 5.2 on this slide, which is weird for a new PHP talk, but we have significant install base still on 5.2. Some of you will be running applications on PHP 5.2. So I want to talk about how some of the new features apply, not just in your greenfield, yay, building a new thing kind of a project, but also in the projects that have been around for a while and that we hope will continue to live and be profitable for quite a while into the future. So right now, 5.2, dead and gone. 5.3, dead and gone. 5.4, sunset years. We could call this kind of retirement for PHP 5.4. It is security fixes only until September. So basically, nobody's fixing it. We're just, if anything really bad happens, we'll dig it out of a hole, but really nobody's interested. 5.5 and 5.6, these are our current stable versions. So these are the versions of PHP that are actively supported, released, under some kind of development. I've got 7 on the timeline. We know when 7 will be released. It will be released later this year. I bet against Sarah Golemon as to when it would be released. Sarah's a pretty major contributor, and I'm not involved at all. So I might be losing that wager. But the idea is that you will see probably alphas of 7 in the second half of this year through into the autumn. The aim is to release before the end of the year. Whether we make it or not, wait and see. Today's talk is only about things you can actually do with PHP today. So I have nothing about 7 because we are not feature complete yet. I also want to talk about actually what the real world looks like for PHP. This is a graph of what percentage of PHP installations use which versions, showing the change over the last 12 months. Look at that yellow line at the top. It's just dipped under 50%. That's PHP 5.3. Remember the dead version? So the percentage of PHP applications running on entirely unsupported platforms is massive. 5.2, green line, dropping down. 5.4 is the orange line, but remember that's virtually dead as well, because it's retiring. Slowing down a bit, 5.4. Our current stable version installation of these two lines here, 5.5, 5.6. They make about 15% between them, if you round up. Our long tail comes from a number of things. It comes from PHP continues to work. Like, if you have a 5.2 platform and you have an application on that 5.2 platform, you know there's nothing wrong with it. We didn't take 5.2 away when it went end of life. This talk, I'm going to show you some of the new features that might be useful to you. Some of the not so new but becoming available in frameworks and libraries features, so you'll see those in your projects. And some tips for upgrading your existing applications. I don't believe that today in PHP we still ship a website 2 years later, it's rubbish, so we just buy another one, maybe from a different agency. PHP is not just about websites. PHP has us building applications, big ones, business-critical applications, money-making applications, and those shouldn't need to be rewritten. every 2 years. They will live and change. So we will be upgrading. Things you need to know about if you're going to upgrade. There are some gotchas. In particular, if you're on 5.2 or 5.3, quite a lot changed. 5.3 should have been a major version release. There were so many changes and so much good stuff in it. 5.2 applications genuinely are in a different world. Lots of good things came in 5.3. In 5.4, it was the first of what I would call the modern era of PHP 5 releases. You can see from my timeline that the releases are now much, much more frequent. I got actively involved in PHP somewhere around here, 5.2. The wait for 5.3 went on forever. We knew there were good features coming, and it was like it'll be ready when it's ready, and then we argued about PHP 6, and the thread about namespace separators went on forever. We don't do that anymore. Nothing happens that hasn't been voted on and agreed via public RFC. Our releases are aimed to be every 12 months, and they're not far off that. The difference, the delta between each version, minor version of PHP, is therefore much smaller, because we don't have unsupervised internals developers building cathedrals for 3 years and throwing it over the hedge to user land. If you are left behind, 5.3 or earlier, you're missing out on some of the nicer things that we have, but also a much smoother PHP upgrade process. We know it's a problem. We changed it massively when we released 5.3 and then 5.4. So if you're more than 5 years out of date, then we have some nice surprises for you. Register Globals is gone. I know there were people in the room who don't really know what this Register Globals thing is. I'm pleased about that. Welcome. Don't worry about it. There are not many things that I would say, oh, don't worry about that. Don't worry your pretty little head about that. Register Globals is PHP's dirty laundry. Let's just not talk about it. If you have an application that you have upgraded from PHP 3 or very early PHP 4, this may bite you. In a nutshell, we imported all the variables that came in by any kind of request method into the global symbol space and called it good. Sorry. 5.4 removed the ability to enable short open tags. This is a good thing. They're stupid. But you can't turn them on anymore. This doesn't mean that your code won't work initially. This just means that if you have the short open tag, then you need to literally find a place in your applications to make it a long PHP tag. If you're using the short echo syntax, this pointy bracket question mark equals sign, that will always be available. You don't need to turn on the flag to get it. This is really common in templates. So code bases that have this, which required you to enable all short tags in older versions of PHP, don't worry, you can't turn on the short tags anymore, but you can always use this shortcut. I think that's a good win. Some other gotchas that will bite you, and again, it's all in 5.4, because 5.4 was the version that we removed. I was going to say we removed the nonsense. We removed some of the nonsense. I mean, obviously, there's quite a lot. But 5.4 cleaned up some of it. all in 5.4 actually does mean all, which is revolutionary. But it does mean that when you first run an existing application on 5.4, your logs can look very, very noisy. And it's because it includes eStrict. You can just turn off eStrict. However, my advice would be to at least read the output that eStrict is giving to you. There's some very good advice in eStrict, some good warnings about things not initialized. So yeah, turn it off if that's what you need to do, but take a look at those warnings first. Some other annoying things that changed. You know, in 5.3, there was always that warning about time zones. Well, in 5.4, there's a different warning about time zones. You need to change your settings again. I'm sorry. We've done it the right way this time. But but you have to set your time zone, and it has to be a continent place format, Europe, London, or whatever's appropriate for you. So you need to set that. PHP used to kind of guess, but warn you. And 5.4, it's just shan't. It won't guess, you need to set it. So you'll see this warning everywhere. It doesn't mean a lot. You'll also see this error, and it's a fatal error, frustratingly, about not allowing call time passed by reference. This is a good thing. A function either operates on a reference or it operates on a value. It makes no sense to spontaneously pass a reference into a function that isn't going to treat it like a reference. Absolutely no sense at all. So we changed the way that you could use these. We were a little bit more strict about it in 5.3. In 5.4, you'll see this fatal error for code that works perfectly well. And all it's saying is that when you declare the function, you denote whether or not each parameter is a reference. If it's a reference, it gets the ampersand in front of the dollar, like this example here. The error occurs in the calling context. You cannot denote that this is a reference. You cannot put an ampersand here. When reading the calling code, I find it helpful to realize it's a reference, to see that it is going to be used as a reference in the function, but you're not allowed to have the ampersand in the calling context. So take them out to fix this error. OK, I think that was the gotchas, but it's not all there to trip you up. We have some good news. Now, traits is a 5.4 feature. Traits isn't new PHP by any stretch of the imagination. I've said it's end of life nearly. We'll stop security fixing 5.4 in September. But as the libraries and frameworks begin to bump their minimum versions up, you will start to see traits available in the libraries that you use. So when the language feature became available in 5.4, oh my God, that's amazing. We can use traits in our applications. Whether you did or not, you will now start to see it in documentation of the libraries that you are using. So, quick recap on traits. Traits are fragments of classes. It's a compiler-assisted copy-paste pattern. You use the code once and say, right, this trait here, it's a little snippet of a class. And this class, this class, this class, and that one need it applied. So you apply with the use syntax. PHP will basically take that trait and just paste it everywhere that you had the use syntax and allow you to reuse pieces of classes. Traits can have properties, they can have methods, one or many, they can rely on each other. They are a very nice architectural technique to allow you to put together, to compose your classes with just the functionality that they need in a meaningful way. It avoids what I call the false parent pattern, where you have some kind of generic ancestor in your application, which has some event handling, some logging stuff, an audit trail, whatever, and then all your other objects have to inherit from that. They're not related at all. They just all need the same boilerplate code, and so we used to do it with inheritance. So traits are much nicer. I've got an example here which is pulled from the Silex code base. It looks much better in the Silex code base because I've nastily hacked this, broken the white space, taken out all the comments and squashed it to try and get it on the slide. But this trait is declared, it looks like a class. So trait rather than class as a keyword, but otherwise they do really look like classes, and then you can put them together to make whole classes. This one just has a single log method in it. It allows us to add, with this use command on line 3, it allows us to add that trait into any class that we want to. And then the log method is just available. You can see on line 7, I'm just calling it. So that's traits. Silex has them. Zen Framework 2 has them in the event handling stuff. It's boilerplate code. Any event that wants to be part of the event, any object that wants to be part of the events side of things needs the same boilerplate code. It's available in a trait. So you'll start to see it in your own applications. Let's talk about cool things that came in newer versions of PHP. We're starting to see 5.5 adopted in the community, but slowly. However, there are some really nice things here. And the first one I want to talk about is date-time immutable. I like date-time. I don't think I've used the date function since date-time was introduced. Since 5.3, when date-time really worked. Technically, it was introduced in 5.2, but it was finished in 5.3. Date-time is fabulous, but it can do unexpected things. Have a look at this example. Line 1, we instantiate a new date-time. I haven't passed any arguments to date-time, so that is going to instantiate for the current time. Don't look too closely at the timestamps, because it just looks like I was doing this on Saturday night on Valentine's Day, because that's the kind of girl I am. So printer var gives you a little output of that date. It's got other stuff in it. Couldn't fit it on the slide. On line 3, I'm adding 4 days, date interval P4D, 4 days, to my date, and storing the return in $result. However, when you var dump important date and $result, $result looks like you'd expect. It's 4 days in the future. However, important date has also wandered off to 4 days in the future, which isn't entirely what you'd expect. 5.5 gives us date-time immutable. Date-time immutable it's a value object. You instantiate it, and it just represents those values. We don't change things, it's just here. And when you do exactly the same code, if I flip back and forward, the class name is the only thing that changes. However, the second time that we print our important date, it's still where we left it, doesn't unexpectedly update. So date-time immutable, possibly we should have had it in the first place, but it's here now in 5.5, and I'm excited about that. 5.5 brought in easy password hashing. It's actually backwards compatible with earlier versions, so please don't tune out on me if you're not using 5.5 yet. How can I frame this? Has anyone here ever built a website in PHP which allowed users to log in? Anyone? Yeah, the entire room. So why do we do such a bad job of storing people's passwords? Like, why is that? It's like a long-standing tradition. It's part of our culture that we should just MD5 it, lob it over the hedge, call it good, right? We know that this isn't the right thing. We understand that MD5 is bad. We think we sort of understand that we should probably salt, and probably not always with the same salt, but very few applications actually implement this. 5.5 has it built in, and we've got it backported to userland. It looks like this. On line 1, the user registers and supplies us a password. On line 2, we hash that password. The password hash function takes the password that was supplied, and then it takes a second argument, which is how you'd like it hashed. I've used this constant password default. Right now, password default is the same as the password bcrypt constant. So my hash will be a bcrypt hash. Password default is a promise. You put this in your code, PHP will always do the right thing for now. So as we get more powerful applications, better encryption, generally more powerful machines, as our crypto standards change, password default will always do the right thing. So there are other constants, but it's irrelevant because password default does the thinking for you. On line 3, I've just echoed the return value, and what you get is this that I've listed under the output. This string, as unbeautiful as it is, contains information about the algorithm that was used to hash it and about the salt that was used. So you don't need to store the salt separately. It's just implemented it. Note to self. You need more than 32 characters to store this. Guess how I found that out? This string is 60 characters wide. That's what you get from bcrypt. Obviously, password default means at some point it's going to be more encrypted and potentially be longer. So the recommended password width is 255 characters. Just do it, and then we won't be having this conversation again in the future. Yes, I tried to store it in my existing password 32 characters database. Oh well. So the user's registered, we've hashed their password, we've stored it. We need the other half now. We take this existing hash, which is the same as on the previous screen, but it's dropped off, and we verify the password. If you are accustomed to putting MD5 and the plain text in the where clause of is there a username and MD5 password that matches this, your pattern will change a little bit. What we'll do is we need to fetch the user and their hashed password, and then pass both our stored hash and the string that the user just supplied to us into the password verify function. And what that does is it says, what's the algorithm, what's the salt, applies those to the plain text version, comes back and says yes or no. So from a developer point of view, it's very, very straightforward to use. This feature is built in 5.5, so it's in core in 5.5. However, there's nothing here that we couldn't already do. So Anthony, who fitted the feature to 5.5, also made this available for userland. There is a minimum version on it. It's something like 5.3.9, because there was some horrific problem with bcrypt before that. But in your older applications, you can still use the PHP implementation. So the top of index.php will say hash hash, remove this when you upgrade to 5.5, and then it'll include the file with the functions in it. At some point, you'll upgrade to 5.5. You won't be able to redeclare the functions. You can take the include line out. One thing that comes up at work, I've been freelance for years, but I'm now working 3 days a week for a company called Siftware. We do a bunch of project rescue and migration, which means that I see these problems all the time. The problem that the developers were having was that, well, we've currently got the database stored as MD5s, so we can't get the plain text of the passwords in order to hash them in the new way. So how's that going to work? What we've done there is we've applied the correct hashing as a batch job to the existing MD5s. So we've hashed the MD5 and stored that. When the user logs in, if they fail on their password check, we MD5 their password and retry. And if we can get them in that way, then we rehash their plain text password while we've got it quickly. So we're slowly cleaning up the database with that. It doesn't mean the login has a couple of goes for users that haven't logged in for a while, but it's a way of non-disruptively re-encoding your passwords and passing that on. A little glimpse into the weird and interesting problems that I solve in my day job. We are recruiting, so if you want to join me in solving weird and interesting problems, you should talk to me about that. Let's talk about generators. A generator looks like a function until you look really closely, because instead of returning a value, a generator makes a series of values available. This isn't a new idea. You'll see it in other languages. I've seen it in Python, I think, first of all. Now we have it in PHP. So it looks something like this. The generator is the function at the top of this example. So we connect to a database, we put together a PDO statement, and then we just loop over, fetching rows from the PDO statement. On line 5 is the magic keyword yield. That's how you know it's a generator. It's got a yield keyword in it. What happens is we call this function, it's a generator, so it's kind of an iterator with special abilities. It's like iterator plus plus. Line 9 is where we're using this. We call the function, it looks like we've called a function, it's returned an array, and we've iterated over the array. But what we've actually done is we've instantiated the generator. As we iterate over it, we'll go back to the generator and advance until we hit the yield statement. Yield feels like return. It returns the value that's after it. Inside the loop, line 10 echoes and loops again, at which point we re-enter the function at the point that we left it. So we kind of end up after line 5, and then we continue to run the function. In this case, we just go round that while loop again. So the generators allow us to handle sequences of values, either calculating them on the fly or fetching them on the fly. So handling database cursors, stream handling, waiting for incoming calls, that kind of thing. It's very, very nice and elegant. I'm very happy that we have this in PHP. I think this is going to be a major reason for many libraries to want to bump their minimum version up to 5.5 at the earliest opportunity. So you will find that minimum versions in the PHP community are going to start to move up because there's such good things have come in recently. Also, PHP 5.5 isn't really new. It's widely available. It's been out for a couple of years. It's in Ubuntu LTS. The distros have it. So realistically, we could all run our applications on 5.5, if not 5.6. Sister to the generators, I got distracted then about distros. Sister to the generators is coroutines. This isn't exactly a language function. It uses the same stuff as the generators that I just mentioned. Coroutines are separate functions that interactively pass responsibility to one another. Again, common in other languages. The generator implementation, I said it was better than an iterator, and then I just showed you it iterating. Coroutines are the plus plus that I mentioned. So here I have a function. Again, it's a generator, but instead of returning a value, it accepts a value. Look at line 6. We connect, we prepare our statement, we loop, and each time round the loop, we accept a value. Here's the code that calls the code on the previous slide. I could make my font smaller, but I think it's small enough already. We have a logger variable, which is that generator. It looks like we've called a function. We haven't. We've instantiated the generator. And then we have this extra method that we don't usually have in iterators called send, which allows us to inject a value into the yield statement. So you can have code that is just generator, which perhaps reads from a stream, handles the stream, and yields a value. And you can have code that injects a value to something which processes those records and doesn't need to tangle its concerns with stream handling. So it doesn't matter if you're reading from a live stream or an archived stream or some other format. The processing just accepts a value and continues to iterate within the function. Again, really good reason to bump the minimum version, because this is a very nice feature, especially for library authors. The MySQL extension is marked as deprecated in 5.5. That is not to say that you are no longer allowed to connect to MySQL, but it's an admission that in PHP we have, as always, there's so many ways to skin a cat. I can think of about 5 reasonable ways to connect to MySQL, and we're not maintaining this one. So the e-deprecated warning will let you know that you're sort of left in 2002 with the functionality that's available in the MySQL extension. Relatively easy fix. Ideally implement PDO. It's awesome. Object-oriented interface to databases everywhere. Alternatively, you can put the MySQLi extension in. It is more similar to the MySQL extension, but it is not as straightforward as find and replace MySQL underscore with MySQLi underscore. There are subtle differences in the return values and the parameters required by the almost equivalent functions available. So there's some human intervention needed to get that upgrade through. Other things you need to know about running on 5.5. APC isn't available. The most basic thing everyone knows about installing PHP is install PHP, make sure you install APC. It's not there anymore. In theory, APC is not available for PHP 5.4, which I think has really affected our adoption rates, actually, for 5.4. In theory, APC is not available for PHP 5.4. APC works perfectly well with PHP 5.4 unless you have a lot of closures. If you have crazy, insane numbers of closures, then crazy, insane edge cases happen. But APC, for the most part, did work. But it had some problems, so we stopped using it. Zend had a caching extension that they were using, and they open-sourced that. So it became opcache. It's available from PECL for PHP 5.4, but PHP 5.5 and later have it built in. So the APC step, you don't need to do that. It's built into the language. That's the good news. The bad news is it's disabled by default. So you should look out for that. Particularly look out for it if you're just quickly compiling PHP 5.5 to do some performance comparison. I have seen PHP 5.5 without opcache outperform PHP 5.3 with APC under realistic load testing multiple times. It's not that unusual. So you may not realize that you don't even have your opcache turned on. If you're trying to persuade your boss or your customer that you need to upgrade, make sure you've turned on the opcache, because the numbers will be even bigger. I said that 5.5 was a realistic platform for us all to run on, but oh my gosh, there's some lovely things in 5.6. And maybe they're just syntactic sugar, maybe they're things that we could have already achieved, but I like them. I'm impatient for 5.6, driving my colleagues mad, wanting to upgrade everything. I'll get there, I will. The first is that we have a new magic method, __debug info. I don't know about you, but I am getting very, very tired of especially large full-stack frameworks that you can't really inspect because you var dump them and the result just makes your eyes bleed. Or you need to ramp up the maximum depth on Xdebug to just beyond belief because they are so heavy and so nested. __debug info is like the JSON serialized stuff or __ sleep. It specifies what should be available in an object when you var dump it. So here I have a simple class with a simple example, __ debug info. When you dump my buggy class, you will only get the problem data property. So I've got lots of other metadata or nested unrelated objects or the database connection or whatever. Those won't appear. You'll only see this specific property which holds data which you would want in your var dump. I like this. I'm kind of impatient for this. Like, toString is cool, and this is cooler. We're variadic functions. This is syntactic sugar. We had like func get args. Look on line 1. I'm declaring a userland function. It's called combine. The first argument is the name of the function that you want to apply to the string. And ... is the splat operator. And it's just saying, any other incoming parameters stick in this array. So the first argument gets captured into the first parameter, normal. And everything else, don't really care how many there are. We don't have method overloading really in PHP. Just bung it all into the strings array. I like this. It's a very nice way of doing variable arguments. Then we can iterate over it, make a string, apply the transform, return it. Lovely, I've got a working example. But you get the idea that you can declare a function that just says, yeah, whatever else. Just put it in this array. That's nice. It's nice. But it's got a sister, and argument unpacking is the first time in years that I have described PHP as wild. Okay. I enjoy visiting other programming languages, and sometimes they blow my mind, but normally not PHP. I've been doing it a long time. This is wild. Take any existing function, your function, library function, built-in language function, doesn't matter. get the arguments that you want in the correct order in an enumerated array. So here's a fairly convoluted example where there's a function that displays a product, expects the name, the ID, and the price of the product as the 3 incoming parameters. We're fetching the products from the database, and we iterate over them. Notice that I am fetching with PDO fetch num. I think this is the first useful use I've ever seen for PDO fetch num. Who knew that the internals people have built as a feature we were actually going to need one day? I normally hate it and use PDO fetch assoc. However, here it has to be fetch num. The columns have to be in an enumerated array in the correct order. And then you can just put in the splat operator and the array. PHP will unpack and take element 0 and pass it as the first parameter, and take element 1 and pass it as the second parameter, and so on. Doesn't understand key names, it's just enumerated. But this is an array. This is an array of 3 elements, and ... unpacks it into there. That's neat. You can pass these things around and just pop them out whenever you need them. It's in 5.6. Can we all upgrade now? There's just some really cool stuff here, and I'm excited about it. I've got some thoughts about upgrading an existing system. And I could explain to you why this is important, but we're developers, so I'm going to start with a graph. So who doesn't like graphs, right? This is a benchmark comparison. The different colors are different versions of PHP, and I am measuring how long each one takes to perform exactly the same task. This task in this benchmark is running the bench.php script that comes with the PHP source code. It's designed for the benchmarking. And it does tedious things like works through a series of algorithms, see how long it takes. PHP 5.2 takes nearly 4 seconds. PHP 5.3 takes less than 3. And PHP 5.4, 5.5, 5.6, our modern era versions, all take around 2 seconds, give or take. It's a big performance speed up. However, there are 2 very important things missing from this graph. And they're because there isn't an easy way to graph this. The first thing missing from this graph is that bench.php really doesn't do what your applications do. And it doesn't show how big the improvement was in PHP 5.4. When PHP 5.4 was at, I'm going to say RC stage, so nearly released, I ran some benchmarks. Except this was quite a while ago, and I didn't know how to benchmark. I don't want to tell you a long story about things Lorna doesn't know. It'd be a really long story. But at the time, I didn't know how to benchmark. So I tried to invent my own benchmark. I thought about the code that I write as a general rule, and then wrote some loops and did those things in loops and like reassigned stuff, and then unassigned it to see what the garbage collector would do. This somewhat naive benchmark script proved that PHP 5.4 was twice as fast as PHP 5.3. I was blown away. No one told me it was twice as fast. Then I had a chat with someone who actually knows what they're doing. Derek, thanks. And I showed him my benchmark script. Of course it's twice as fast, says Derek. The main optimizations in PHP 5.4 were all in object instantiation. So if anyone is not looping through lots of boring mathematical algorithms, but is instead using perhaps object-oriented programming or a full-stack framework in their PHP application, your speedups will be bigger than this for 5.4 and later. They are big, the improvements are impressive. The other thing that isn't on this graph, because it's so subjective between applications, is memory usage. Your mileage will inevitably vary. But upgrading from 5.3 or earlier through to 5.4 and beyond, most people going straight to 5.5, 5.6 now, you will see your memory reduction around 20 to 30%, typically. That's a lot. I'd like 20 to 30% more RAM in my hardware, actually, thanks. And it's a free upgrade. So for me, there's lots and lots of reasons to upgrade. I also struggle, like I say, I do migration and rescue. So we see a lot of old and neglected projects. My developer went snowboarding. Is our kind of target customer. My developer went snowboarding and never came back. We get those applications, and we improve them, modernize them, upgrade them, automate the deployment, and then we can support that business on what they've already paid for, which is nice, and it's good economics for them. But when those clients are resisting upgrade, it kind of bothers me. It bothers me that PHP 5.2 is good enough for any business. We have some good stuff already built. I don't feel that it is ethical to leave PHP applications running on unsupported, slow, clunky versions, causing our clients or whoever's paying for the hosting to pay more for the hosting. It's inefficient. They're just not getting the best they could get out of an application they've already paid for. So that's kind of I guess that's why I do what I do. It's kind of a personal thing, but I don't have a good feeling about, oh, well, it's good enough for you. Really? I don't feel that way about it. So how do I actually upgrade those scary old hairy systems? No test suite, no automated deployment, usually no test server, very often no source control. Well, take a deep breath. Step 1, turn on eDeprecated on your existing platform. We didn't introduce this to 5.3, so if you're somewhere before 2009, then you haven't got this option. But I do find it super helpful. Nothing gets removed from PHP now, in the modern era. If you've been doing PHP for a while, you've had the experience of upgrading and something was suddenly gone. That's not cool. We don't do that anymore. So from 5.3, we introduced this error reporting level of eDeprecated. Turn it on, have a look what's in your logs. It will let you know what you are currently using, which won't be available when you upgrade. So that's a really good first step. It tells you how big your problems are. There's a PHP compatibility standard available from this URL by a cool guy named Wim, and it's especially good for those earlier versions, 5.2, 5.3, 5.4, to get you up to the new versions. We don't have a lot of built-in tools, but these sniffs will illustrate things like the call time passed by reference, things that are going to be picked up by eStrict. So it will flag for you what's not going to work. Lint check is a really good thing to add. Some of you may know I'm the project lead on the Joined In project, which means, yes, if you have any opinions about Joined In, you can talk to me about that anytime this week. But we memorably took out the site once when another co-maintainer, who should have known better, did our massive code cleanup and somehow introduced short array syntax at a time when the live server was still on 5.3, but apparently we didn't have our dev servers quite in sync. So then a co-maintainer who should have known better, this one, promptly ran the code, liked it, merged it, shipped it, broke the live server. Hooray! So pretty much all of my build processes now have a lint check in it. And I've stolen this thing task basically from the joined-in code base, because I know it's there, because I got burned. And I also have a little one-liner here that you can use. But a PHP lint check is PHP-L, but it only takes one file name. So that's kind of cumbersome if you need to check each file one at a time in your project. Somebody nodding at me, very tired from the back. Yes, I'm sorry. So you can just find all your PHP files and push them through xargs and look for a line that doesn't say there are no problems here. So I find this really helpful. Just compile new PHP and have a quick lint check. Run your test suite. Once you've compiled PHP, phpunit.far doesn't care what version of PHP you're running. So you can compile PHP, use the far, and then point it at whatever your usual phpunit.xml file is, and run your unit tests. Whether you see everything blows up, or a few things fail, or everything's cool, tells you how big your upgrade problems are going to be. There are some changes, so very few people will see no difference on their unit test suites, but it gives you a good sense of scale. Like, how big is this problem? I really like to run projects with the PHP web server if it's a web application. Again, you can just compile PHP and then run the local web server. PHP dash, that's a capital S. Not sure how clear that is. That's a capital S, localhost : 8080, and then you just browse to that address, and your whatever directory you were in is your web root for that address. You get the logs on the command line where you ran it, so you can see how broken. Again, a sense of how broken this is. Lots of red, generally a bad idea. If your application is pretty much working, maybe things are not so bad. Things you need to know about the PHP web server. It is single-threaded. Think about that. OK, you're not going to use this in production. It is single-threaded. Also, it's made of PHP. So if your PHP crashes, your web server just went over as well. In general, good for testing. Plausible for a little admin thing that maybe runs inside the office. Probably not recommended for production. OK? I mean, each to their own. Someone always comes to tell me why they're running it in production and why that's fine. I look forward to talking to you if you are that person. But for everybody else, please don't run this in production. A couple of other things you need to know. Doesn't have to be localhost. You can connect it to another domain name. Other people on the same network with that in their hosts file can then connect to it. Very useful for watching weblogs when management are breaking stuff. The -t specifies the web root, so if you're running this under supervisor D or something similar, rather than just manually from the web root directory, you can specify the directory. -c to specify the config file. Recommend that you specify a config file. If you don't, you get built-in language defaults in PHP, and quite frankly, they're weird. There probably should be a more academic way of saying that, but they're just weird. Routing.php is where you can put things that would be in your web server config, like pretty URLs and rewrites and whatever else you're setting in htaccess or the equivalent. So just run through those steps. Turn on eDeprecated, try with the code sniffer with the PHP compatibility standard. Lint check and unit tests. Just have a go, see how that looks. Spin it up with the web server. If the sky hasn't fallen in yet, seriously, just upgrade your test platform. And then upgrade your staging platform. And then upgrade your live platform. Once you get out of the hell, that is pre-PHP 5.4, your upgrades become non-events. 5.3 to 5.5.5.6 isn't bad. 5.2, I'm sorry, you do have work to do, but it is worth it. I told my managed hosting company that if they allowed me to ship on 5.4, they were determined I needed 5.3. I didn't. If they allowed me to ship on 5.4, they could upgrade from 5.4 to 5.5 overnight, anytime, without telling me. They didn't upgrade without telling me. But there were no problems. It was a relatively simple PHP application. I am of the opinion that nothing you ship today should go on a platform older than 5.5. And I'm being generous because I know that the hosts are laggy, that distros like to install their own versions. It can take time to catch up. 5.5 is widely available. If your host doesn't ship 5.5, you need a better host. And this isn't just for your application either. This is about, as a community, how do we feel about that long tail? How do we feel about the person who goes to college, learns a bit of PHP, gets a textbook, buys themselves some hosting, and then finds her new platform is 5.3? Because that's acceptable in PHP. Is that good enough for her because she's not important and she didn't know better? People who install WordPress or Drupal, who don't know what version of PHP they have and don't care. But the market allows 5.3 or 5.4 to be standard. They're end of life. Good enough? By making good decisions for our own applications, even the ones that we've had for a while, that we hope will live for a while, By actively getting new versions, getting things upgraded, we create a market for PHP to be better for what we have already built to be available and to be used by all of us. Those new shiny platforms are awesome. It's there. Sometimes it's been available for years. So let's upgrade ourselves and let's demand more from the hosting companies. I think a lot of people think that an upgrade will be hard, especially if you are old enough in PHP years, right? If you're new to the industry, regardless of your age, you are young in PHP years. If you've been doing this for a while, regardless of your age, you are old in PHP years. And some of you are old enough in PHP years to remember the PHP 4, PHP 5 upgrade. A lot of people got burned by that. Always ship onto a current platform, but never upgrade. If you call me and ask me to sell you some consultancy on upgrading your platform, I will literally tell you to go home and run it on PHP 5.6, and then ring me if you have a problem. Because most of the time, it would be unethical to charge you. Stuff is doable. The tools are all here. So I hope that this has given you an idea of the sparkly goodness, some nice code syntax, the improved performance, realistically what you could expect, and also some things you need to know to use this in your existing applications. This time next year, I'll be talking about how to upgrade to PHP 7. And step 1 will be make sure you're on PHP 5 or 5.5 or 5.6, because the upgrade paths will all start there. So you've got a year to sort that out. OK, I am getting told I have a few minutes for questions, and there are some roving mics. So if anyone would like to ask anything, now is your time. Yeah, just wait a second while someone gives you a mic. There we go. You're on.
Great talk. So my company is on 5.3. I feel like you've gave conflicting information on what the next upgrade should be. Should it be to 5.4 and then 5.5, or should it be straight from 5.3 to 5.5 or 5.6?
Go as high as you can. That's a really good question, actually. A lot of the stuff that I was mentioning, kind of things changed in 5.4, but I would always recommend from 5.2, you might need to go to 5.3. From 5.3, good, awesome. Go straight to 5.6 or 5.5 if that's kind of a constraint for you. You don't need to go through 5.4 at all. So just go straight for it. And I've seen lots of companies, especially with APC not available, seen a lot of companies skip 5.4 and go through 5.3 to 5.5 with really good success. Good question, thank you. Who else? Got a hand over there. Run!
What happened to PHP 6?
So, for years, I went around telling people that we got drunk at a conference in Canada and deleted the branch, which is, it's only half true. PHP 6 was a real thing. It never actually got its .0 release, but a lot of people put in a lot of work, and it went in a very specific direction in terms of the Unicode and multi-language support. In the end, we had bitten off more than we could chew, and we agreed as a majority, rather than unanimously, that as a community, we were not going to ship PHP 6. So that was way back when. Stuff that was in PHP 6 became PHP 5.3. I bitch about the bike shedding over namespace operators, but PHP 6 was part of the delay for PHP 5.3, is that was all going on at the same time. Lots was written about PHP 6, books are published about PHP 6, and a decision was made that where we are now with PHP 5.6, which is likely to be the last release on the 5 branch, our next major version didn't look anything like that PHP 6. So I don't think it was just that we thought the Perl 6 thing made it a bad omen. But there was an RFC and voting, and so we've gone for 7. So it will be 7.0 that you see, hopefully, in the next 12 months. Cool. Okay, everyone's already tired, so that's going to be fabulous. I have a few links on this slide that I want to mention. Please leave me some feedback. As I mentioned, I run the Joined In project, so if there's anything you don't like while you're there, I guess you can come and talk to me about it. Please leave me feedback. Any good? Work for you? Something you don't want me to be doing if I get to come here next year? There's a video that I want to mention. They wouldn't let me call my video course Things Lorna Thinks You Need to Know, but that should be its tagline. So this course covers CLI stuff from PHP, all of the PSR standards, object-oriented programming, PDO stuff. And it's available online from O'Reilly. O'Reilly are here, and they have both my other books, PHP Web Services and PHP Master. And if you want to get in touch, please get in touch. The slides are linked from the Joined In page. And I'm around, so please, please feel free to come and talk to me through the event. Have a great time.